History Month, and the Georgia Room staff of the Augusta Public Library has put together this virtual tutorial to offer assistance to those interested in tracing the genealogy of hard-to-find women ancestors in their family tree. Hopefully this tutorial will guide you on where to look for records and how to approach your research so you can bring your unknown female ancestors out of obscurity. This tutorial celebrates the countless generations of women who populate our family trees, but because of legal status and oppression have remained obscured by history. As family historians, we are quick to learn that looking for information about our female ancestors can be challenging. So why is that? There are two primary reasons. The first is because women take on their husband's surnames when they marry, presenting a challenge when attempting to locate information about her prior to her marriage. But to do so, you must determine her maiden name. Secondly, ordinary everyday women, unlike men, did not create voluminous records. Unless your female ancestor was famous, notorious, or otherwise well known for some reason, she lived the life of every woman and left little documentation of her life behind. And because of these challenges, women in our family lineage are sorely neglected. But our women ancestors led fascinating lives and deserve their stories to be told, so a more balanced history emerges. Hopefully, this tutorial will guide you along the way. So half of the ancestors who make up our family trees are women. Ordinary, everyday women who led fascinating lives and deserve their stories to be told. So how do we begin to tell their stories? We start with vital records because they are the lowest hanging fruit and must be examined before we move forward. So what are vital records? These are official documents that record life's major events, such as birth, marriage, and death. We can also lump divorce records in this category. Vital records may be the only place you can find direct evidence of a woman's life. You typically work in reverse order with vital records, starting with death, then you're going to hunt for marriage records, and finally birth records. Depending on where your ancestor lived, you're probably going to have the most luck finding a marriage record. Until the early to middle part of the 20th century, birth and death records were a pretty casual affair. But marriage records were taken a little more seriously, as they were a binding contract between a man and a woman, so more likely to have been recorded. So when looking for vital records, remember to record every clue and where you found that record. When trying to identify a female ancestor, it is important to document all the clues you find, whether those clues provide you with direct evidence of her identity or indirect evidence. Let's look at some examples of vital records and the clues they can offer. So death certificates can provide a wealth of information and direct evidence about our women ancestors. You'll notice that this death certificate on the left for Miss Sally Carter Crocker gives her date of birth as August 5th, 1887, as well as her birthplace, which was Atlanta, Georgia, and her date of death as August 7th, 1930. These are all important details, but the best detail in this death certificate is that it lists the names of her parents, David Carter of Atlanta, Georgia, and Mary Pace from Wake County, North Carolina. So not only does this death certificate show us Sally's maiden name of Carter, it also gives us her mother's maiden name of Pace. So it takes us back a generation with Mary's mother's maiden name. And it also gives the location of her mother's birth in Wake County, North Carolina. So that's a place to look for records associated with Sally's mother. You do have to be cautious though when accepting information found in a death certificate because the informant may not always be correct. In this case, the informant is Sally's husband, so the information is secondhand. He could be just guessing about her parents. We're not even sure if he even met her parents, So it's important to use multiple sources to verify your clues. When a death certificate isn't available, there are some other vital records associated with death you can look for, including church death registers, town death registers, cemetery and internment records, and obituaries and death notices in newspapers. Often you have to use these kinds of records because most states didn't require death certificates until the late 19th century, early 20th century. In Georgia, not until 1919. Now, if you're lucky enough to find a marriage certificate for the bride, it is almost guaranteed you will find the surname or maiden name of the bride. This particular marriage record for Johnny Crocker and Sally Carter, whose death certificate we saw before, shows parents for both bride and groom. Sally's parents listed as David and Martha Carter. Now on the death record, Sally's mother is named as Mary, so here we see a discrepancy with her mother's name. Is it Martha or Mary? Remember how I told you to be cautious about accepting information you read on a death certificate as being totally accurate because it's secondhand information? Well, likely the marriage record is more accurate in terms of Sally's parents' names because Sally is giving the information. But again, these details need to be verified by locating as much documentation on Sally's life as you can find. As you go further back in time, you're less likely to find a marriage certificate, but you might find marriage bans, which is an announcement about an upcoming marriage, or marriages recorded in civil and church registers. This entry below is an example of two marriage records located in a civil register or marriage book from 1882 in Delaware. The records list the names of the grooms, the brides with surnames, what city they are from in Delaware, and where they were married. It also lists the rector who married them and those who witnessed the marriage. In some cases, other family members are listed as witnesses, which can open up other avenues of research. These are all important clues in terms of leading to additional records. Finding out the church where the rector officiated might lead you to church records about the female in question, and knowing the town where she lived narrows down your search even further. Don't forget to check for marriages in newspapers. We typically think of marriage announcements in newspapers as a more recent thing, but these 3 matrimony notices were found among the many listed in the Augusta Chronicle for 1800, happening in Augusta and in other Georgia cities. In each notice, we learn the bride's surname. In the February 15th notice, we are given the name of the pastor who married the couple, James F. Hull. So remember, again, think of church records. And in the June 28th notice, we're given the bride's father's name. Augusta-Richmond County Pines Library card holders have access to the Digital Chronicle archives, as well as the hundreds of digitized Georgia newspapers in the Georgia Historic Newspapers website in Galileo, which is Georgia's virtual library of over 100 free databases. So always consider historic newspapers in your genealogy research. Now, birth certificates like death certificates are a relatively more recent phenomenon. Most states began recording births between 1900 and 1930, but each state is different, so that's something you'll have to figure out for the state where your ancestor was born, if you know that. This South Carolina birth certificate, for example, is from 1917, and under the category for mother of the child, the certificate asks for her name before marriage, and in this case, the mother's surname or maiden name is Reynolds. For births occurring earlier, there are other birth records that you can search for. If a birth certificate isn't available, you can search for baptismal or christening records. Churches will often record baptisms as well as births. This Maryland christening record on the left from 1818 for Catherine Ann Rice provides us with her birth date, her place of birth, and her parents' names. Unfortunately, we're not given the Mother Elizabeth's maiden name. And again, don't overlook newspapers. Births are often announced in the pages of our local newspapers. This particular announcement is from the early 20th century and gives us the mother's surname before marriage. And her name is Miss Inez Lancaster of Denmark, South Carolina. Once we're done searching for vital records about our female ancestors, we hopefully have enough information to move forward with other records. But remember, the further back in time you go, the more likely information will be scant because records have been lost or destroyed, and there's more attention given to men in early records than women. This is mainly due to a woman's diminished legal status. So to address this lack of information, the main objective is to leave no stone unturned. You never know what record will provide you with information, and you never know what record about someone else will provide you with facts about your female ancestor. This is where getting creative about how to move forward and think about your female ancestor will open doors into your research. Begin to consider the many different roles a woman played in her life. As mother, as a sister, as a daughter, as an aunt, a granddaughter, a niece, a friend, and a neighbor. As a daughter, there may be mention of her in records on her father or mother, such as wills and other probate records. As a wife or widow, check for all records of her husband that may likely name her, such as land records and pension applications. As a widow, her legal and social status changed, so she may create records under her own name. As a mother, look for documents on her children, such as death certificates that give the mother's name. As a grandmother or mother-in-law, she may be living with one of her children or grandchildren and can be found on a census record living in the household. In fact, census records are a great next step after you've exhausted your vital record search. This slide lists the many different resources you should consider when sleuthing out your female ancestor. Let's take a look at census records. A count of the United States population has been taken every 10 years since 1790, with 2020 being our last census year and 2030 being the next. Because of a 72-year privacy restriction, the most current census available for public viewing is 1940. 1950 will be available next year in 2022. The very early census records from 1790 to 1840 are not as productive in terms of information, but do list the head of household, and sometimes this is a woman. Unfortunately, from 1790 to 1840, the rest of the household is just marked as a tally. But starting in 1850, everyone in the household, with the exception of slaves, is listed by name. And this is where you will begin to find more information on your women ancestors. The only year not available to us is the 1890 census, which was destroyed in a fire. Census records are easily accessed online in Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.org. Augusta Public Library is a Family Search affiliate library which gives our library patrons access to records otherwise only available by visiting the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, Utah. The 1850 census, which I mentioned is the first census to list everyone in the household, and also asks couples whether they were married within the year the census was taken. By listing this information, you can narrow down the marriage year and begin looking for a marriage record if you haven't already found one. It also asks where the individuals in the household are from, further narrowing your search. According to this 1850 census record taken in Richmond County, we see that Charles McCoy, whose occupation is listed as planter, is married to Frances. And we learn that while Charles is from Kentucky, Frances is listed as being born in Georgia. Ages are also listed, so we can figure out the age or the years that Frances was born. She's 29 in 1850, so she was born circa 1820. All important clues that can lead us to other records. The 1870 census also asks questions that give us further clues into the lives of our female ancestors, including whether those in the household have parents of foreign birth, and again, the birthplace, age, birth month, and occupation of everyone in the household. In the second example from the Dutch Fork area of Lexington County, South Carolina, Josephine Bonite is a housekeeper married to J.F. Bonite. Her age is 24 and she was born in Tennessee. Neither one of her parents are of foreign birth, so knowing she is from Tennessee and her approximate birth year narrows our search considerably. We can begin looking for records related to her in Tennessee. Another great source created about women are passenger arrival lists. If your woman ancestor was an immigrant, seek out her passenger arrival list. Though the United States has seen an influx of immigrants throughout its history, passenger arrival lists prior to the late 19th century contain scanty details about new arrivals. The passenger lists of the early 20th century, however, offer the most information to genealogists. This particular passenger list lists my grandmother, Maria Loretta Cedrone. Just this passenger list alone gives me her age when she arrived in the United States, which was 17, her point of entry, which was Wilmington, Pennsylvania, the year she arrived in 1925, and the city where she departed in Italy, which was Naples. And of course, this is the city where many Southern Italians departed to the United States. It also lists the city where she resided in Italy, which is San Donato. So this opens up a whole other area of research for my Italian family. It also gives me the name of the ship she crossed the Atlantic on, which is the SS Conte Verde, which is at the top left-hand corner of the slide. It also lists her closest of kin relative in Italy, so another area of research. So this one document provides me with several clues to form a more complete picture of my grandmother's life before she came to this country. So no one can trace their family history by looking at only one type of record, like census or vital records, or by depending on databases alone, such as Ancestry.com. Remember, the internet is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of available records. The rest of your research will have to be done on foot, in libraries, archives, courthouses, and cemeteries. In the world of genealogy, researchers trace their ancestry by using a variety of source materials. There are two basic categories of sources you will seek out in the course of researching your female ancestors. Those created about her, such as census records, vital records, etc., which we've gone over briefly, and those created by the woman herself, some of which are listed on this slide: letters, diaries and journals, family Bibles, family artifacts and heirlooms, oral histories, and recipes. Women who wrote letters, kept diaries, stitched quilts or samplers, recorded events in the family Bible, or who tell us their life stories during an oral interview, have created a historical source. Female ancestors who were literate likely kept a family Bible, wrote letters to family and friends, or kept a diary or journal of her activities and thoughts. If letters, diaries, or a Bible have been handed down to you, you have a wonderful beginning to your family history. In these unique sources, you may find family events recorded that you will not find anywhere else. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are a few that we're going to go over today. If you're lucky enough to have a family letter or family letters in your possession, they can offer a fascinating glimpse into the day-to-day lives of your female ancestors. Some may contain interesting gossip not found anywhere else, and they may also contain news items as well as information on daily activities. This slide shows a letter the Augusta Public Library has in its Georgia Heritage Room collection. The letter is part of the Carswell-Kilpatrick Letters, which is a collection of 21 letters donated to the library in 2018. The letters span a 10-year period from 1886 to 1896 and are mostly correspondence between Anna Cornelia Carswell of Hepzibah, Georgia, and her first cousin, Macon Kilpatrick. In this letter, dated August 27, 1891, Anna writes of attending the marriage of Mary Williamson and Fred Cox, and that Mary's family is opposed to the marriage. So you never know what you're likely to find in these family letters. A little bit of gossip, and in this case, information about another woman's marriage. So not only does this letter provide us with clues into Anna Carswell's life, it also provides direct or indirect evidence of Mary Williamson's life. Diaries tend to record a person's feelings, while journals are more likely to enumerate activities and events, although the terms are sometimes used interchangeably. Regardless of its name, diaries are the autobiographies of ordinary women, and these may be the only existing records of their personal lives. Along with genealogical material, diaries will give you a wonderful glimpse into a woman's daily life, her thoughts and her attitudes. She may also record her feelings on national events, such as a war or its impact on her, her family, and her community. If you have a diary or journal by one of your female ancestors, you have a special source indeed. The picture on the right shows a book written about Emily Davis, who was a free African-American woman who lived in Philadelphia during the Civil War. She worked as a seamstress, attended the Institute for Colored Youth, and was an active member of her community. She lived an average life in her day, but what sets her apart is that she kept a diary. Her daily entries from 1863 to 1865 touch on the momentous and the mundane. She discusses her own and her community's reaction to the events of the war, such as the Battle of Gettysburg, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the assassination of President Lincoln, as well as the minutiae of social life in Philadelphia's Black community. Her diaries allow the reader to experience what it was like for a free Black woman to have lived through the Civil War. The next source we're going to discuss within the domain of women is the family Bible. Women in the family were the ones most likely to record vital information in the Bible. This is a good place to find evidence of births, marriages, and deaths before the time when states mandated vital registration in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. If you are researching a slave family, you might find slave births and deaths recorded in the plantation mistress's family Bible. Bibles typically had separate pages for recording births, marriages, and deaths. This slide example is from the Snelling family of Nicholas County, Kentucky, and shows all the births, marriages, and deaths that occurred in the Snelling family for several generations. Search for family Bibles the same way you would look for letters and diaries. Check with relatives, then search your attics, basements, under beds, in closets, or wherever else you store important family papers. Family Bibles, along with personal papers such as diaries and journals, can also be located in local libraries, university archives, and historical and genealogical societies. Family artifacts and heirlooms are another treasure when seeking out clues about your female ancestor. Sewing was part of a woman's daily work and pastime. Needlework such as quilts and samplers were sewn by both young and old women. Some of these artifacts may still exist in your family and give you genealogical clues. From the needlework style, you may be able to determine when the piece was created. Antique jewelry may also provide interesting material for your family history. Check all jewelry for any inscriptions. Lockets may contain photographs or a lock of hair. Mourning jewelry was often created from the deceased's hair and made into rings, brooches, and bracelets. The family silver may also contain clues. It may be engraved with initials or with a crest. The origins of these artifacts and the family stories that surround them are important to your women's history, your women's family history. Finally, we're going to talk about my favorite resource for piecing together clues about your female ancestors. Which is Cookbooks and Recipes. How many of us have inherited our grandmother's or mother's cookbooks and recipe cards, stained and soiled from all the cooking they did for their families throughout their lives? Traditionally, the kitchen or hearth is the domain of the woman. Whether preparing meals for her family or creating natural remedies to care for them in times of sickness. Before the pandemic, the Georgia Heritage Room of the Augusta Public Library featured a family and community cookbook exhibit every holiday season to highlight how these resources can be an important source for learning more about your female ancestors. Most of us would never even think of using a cookbook or recipes handed down to us from our mothers, aunts, and grandmothers as a way to learn more about them. But cookbooks created by women are highly individual and distinctive, a record of their lives within the domestic sphere. Family recipes certainly tell a story. I found this particular cookbook, and I use that term very loosely in this case, stuffed in a box of moldering papers being stored in my mother's basement. It belonged to my maternal grandmother, and as I explored the notebook further, I discovered that the recipes were collaged on top of a journal that belonged to my sister, or to my grandmother's sister, my great aunt Helen Crocker, who I knew nothing about before I found this homemade cookbook. So in this one particular source, I have a cookbook created by my grandmother and a journal created by my great aunt. Remember, if you don't take anything away from this tutorial, remember that the most important thing for you to do is to leave no stone unturned in your research. So this concludes our tutorial on researching the women in our family history. If you can, find some time this month as we celebrate the lives of all women to learn more about those in your family lineage. If you have any questions at all, please contact the Georgia Heritage Room at genealogy@arcpls.org or call us at 706-826-1511. Thank you and take care.